My name is Mary Ellen Kowaleski. I'm the Director of Policy and Planning at the Capital Region Council of Governments, and I join all the other people who've spoken today in welcoming you to this event, and we're very happy that you're here to learn what we hopefully have shared regarding making COD happen within our region. And I'm especially happy to be introducing the final speaker for our program, Stephanie Pollack. Stephanie Pollack is the Associate Director of the Kitty and Michael Dukakis Center for Urban and Regional Policy, overseeing the center's research agenda as well as conducting her own research projects in areas of transportation policy, transit-oriented development, sustainability, and equitable development. Ms. Pollack is also on the core faculty for the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs, teaching courses to graduate students in the law, policy, and society program, and teaching and supervising internships for the Master of Urban and Regional Policy program. Her courses include strategizing public policy, introduction to law and legal reasoning, housing policy, and transportation policy. Ms. Pollack is active in public policy issues affecting transportation, sustainable development, and the environment in Massachusetts. She co-chaired Governor Deval Patrick's 2006 Working Group on Transportation, and also served on Boston Mayor Thomas M. Menino's Climate Action Leadership Committee in 2009 and 2010. Before coming to Northeastern in 2004, Ms. Pollack was senior executive and attorney at the Conservation Law Foundation, Maryland's leading environmental advocacy organization. And her role here today is to think a little bit about what we've heard this morning, and also share some of her vast experience in the area of making transit-oriented development happen.
Stephanie, thank you. When I talk about transit-oriented development, my goal is not to convince you that it's like really hard, but it's worth trying. I want you to leave here and go back to your communities and say, we are the luckiest community in the world because we have transit, and transit is the future. And communities that don't have it are at a huge disadvantage, and we're going to build the future of our community around transit. And it's why kids who grow up and graduate from our high school are going to be able to come back here and live. And it's why our parents aren't going to have to move out of the community when they don't want to live in a house anymore. And it's that important. And you have to be that enthusiastic, and you have to be that much of a true believer. And hopefully I can show you some data that will convince you that that's the case. Okay, so I want to talk about two things. I want to talk about demographics because they've come up today and people keep referring to it. But the numbers, when you see them on charts, are actually mind-boggling. Demography is not destiny, but if you ignore what we know about it, it will actually affect the destiny of your state and your community for the worse. Number two, I want to address that TOD is nice, but it can possibly work in my community argument. And number three, I want to talk about some core ideas that may be useful as you struggle with the specifics of making community work in very different, TOD work in very different communities. All right, so let's look very quickly at some of the national numbers. People are driving less. I'll show you Connecticut in a minute. Do not believe you. It is not, we are past. I do a lot of transportation work, okay? So what I tell transportation folks is this. We used to think transportation was like healthcare costs. The goal was to get driving to rise at a slower rate, but the idea that you could actually have less of it was inconceivable, right? That's not true. We're driving less. It's been going on for a long time. It's true everywhere, and all the demography points to the fact that it will continue. If we plan for driving instead of a future of transportation choices, we are planning for the 20th century instead of the 21st. In fact, this is a study that was just put out by the Frontier Group, where they looked at what's been going on. There is no scenario in which vehicle miles traveled should go up anywhere near where as fast as they were. And interestingly, these are the major scenarios that the federal government uses for planning. There is no scenario under which driving will be as widespread as all of the federal government's planning documents think. So we're all going to plan. That doesn't mean everyone's going to stop driving or stop owning cars, because that's not true. The point is that people want choices. And transit gives them choices. And the other thing I'm going to talk about, which is you can't have a transit-oriented neighborhood without having a walkable neighborhood, that then gives you a third choice. So by definition, you always have a walking choice, a transit choice, and a driving choice if you get the community right. Okay, so everybody knows boomers are us old fogies. The funny thing about this is A demographer would tell you boomers were born up to 1964. Barack Obama would tell you that the baby boom ended in 1960 because he's born in 1961 and wanted to be the first post-boomer president. Gen Y, millennials, echo boomers, whatever you want to call them, were born between 82 and 2000. People think of them as the kids of the baby boomers. They are not kids anymore. They were kids, but they are not kids. They are, in fact, the workforce, okay? They will be the biggest part of the workforce by 2020. 2020 is a pretty near-term horizon year for most land use and transportation planning, right? A lot of you are probably doing long-range plans for 2025, 2020, the millennials there will be more millennials in the workforce than boomers. 8 years from now. So this is not about the distant future when they grow up. While we weren't paying attention, they all grew up. The other thing about millennials that is important is Connecticut, I think Connecticut, were born in Connecticut. Connecticut, worried about job creation. Be worried about job creation. Okay. So the Reserve Bank yesterday released a report on recent college graduates and their locational choices. I'll show you some data. But they're actually asking the question, if you didn't stay in the state where you went to college, why? And the answer was no jobs. The number 2 answer was housing was too expensive. The number 1 answer is no jobs. So jobs is the key. But millennials are the key to jobs because you see, all the employers have already figured that out, and that's who they're looking for employees. And millennials move, right? So more millennials have moved within the last 5 years. Over half of them have already moved in the last 5 years. 2/3 of them expect to move in the next 5 years. So if you're Connecticut or the local economic development authority, and you should be saying to yourself, these people are going to move somewhere and employers want them and I want employers. How do I make myself the place they're going to move? Because they're gonna, right? Aging boomers also like transit-oriented neighborhoods, but here's the real secret. We don't move. We say we want to live in those places, but if you actually look at the data, people in their 50s and 60s don't move. People in their 70s move, but they're not. Boomers aren't that old yet. Okay, different demographic groups have different attitudes. Came up today, people talked about the ULI study. The Urban Land Institute, for those of you who don't know, is developers. They do not do these surveys because they want to prove that smart growth is good or climate change is bad. They do these surveys because they build stuff and they want to make profits, okay? So when they collect this data and they put it out there, it should tell you something. This is the report they just released, America in 2013. Okay. These are groups, demographic groups, in which at least a majority of the group in this survey said they wanted to have the option of transit, okay? Renters, 62%. Gen Y, millennials, 55%. Single-family households, Suhada showed you what the single-family household numbers look like in Connecticut, 53%. So there's a lot of groups. Yes, millennials are important, but they're not the only one. Okay, what are millennials looking for in a community? Smaller homes and shorter commutes, okay? And again, we don't just want millennials. I mean, I want millennials because they're my kids, and I would like at least one of the 3 of them to stay in New England. But employers want millennials, Connecticut want employers. We need to create the places that they will live so that employers will say, oh, I'll be here because my workers will be here. Shorter commutes, smaller homes, want to live close to shops, restaurants, and offices. Want to live with people of a mix of incomes. So this, who would live in an apartment that's identical or in a townhouse that's identical to someone who's paying half as much? Millennials. That's who would live there, if anyone asks you that. They want public transportation to be available. This is a slide that my colleague Barry Bluestone showed last time I was down here, but I brought it back for those of you who haven't seen it, okay? Anytime someone in your community says, why can't we just zone for more single-family homes, this is the answer. This is actual demand for housing between 2000 and 2010. This is not a projection. You will note that there is no demographic over the age of 35 where the demand for housing went up over the 10-year period. And every demographic under the age of 34, the demand went up. If you are building housing for 35 and up, there will be no one who wants it. We have enough of that stuff. We need to be building housing for the millennials. Okay, this is the gold standard. Okay, this was the question asked of millennials between the ages of 18 and 34 who said they are likely to move in the next 5 years. These are the ones you want coming to Connecticut, right? And they were not asked, what is your preference for housing type? They said, when you make that move, you're likely to make. What kind of housing do you expect to live in? 69% said rental. It doesn't matter whether they want to, don't want to. That is what they think they're moving to. That is what they are looking for when they make that next move. Not enough rental housing, you won't get millennial workers. And that's not affordable. That's rental. That's multifamily, some of which is market rate. So the conclusion of the ULI report, which was put out for a group of people who are going to go invest literally billions of dollars in real estate development, is Generation Y places a priority in living in diverse communities with many different housing options in an urban environment. Even if they will likely choose not to use it often, they want to have public transportation as an option and value its presence in their communities. You all have public transportation. You have the key to the millennials. Okay, let's talk about Connecticut and why you should care so much about attracting these workers. Transportation first. Population's flat. Driving, it doesn't seem to be going up that much. But looking at driving and population together doesn't help. You have to look at how much each person or household drives. Per capita driving is already going down in Connecticut. It's been going down in Connecticut since 2005. It's actually been going down in Massachusetts since 2005. It's actually been going down everywhere since 2005. But for some reason, transportation planners track total vehicle miles traveled, not per capita vehicle miles traveled. So they miss the trend entirely, okay? People are already driving less. They want more transportation choices. Yes, even here in Connecticut where there's very little transit and lots of cars. Okay, slow-growing population, not a lot of people, means it matters that you have the right people. Okay, this slide, this is another one of Barry's slides, which is pretty amazing. This is the proportion of expected growth in your state that will be accounted for under current trends between now and 2020 by households over the age of 55. If that number is bigger than 100%, and for Connecticut it is 149%, what that means is you are losing all of the demographics under the age of 55, and all of your population growth is old folks, okay? This is the inverse of an economic development strategy for the state. I myself am very close to that demographic, but I will just tell you, that's not who employers are looking for. So not surprisingly, given that population demography, this is the New England Economic Partnership. So this is a forecast for the next 3 years by the most respected group in New England, run by a colleague of mine at Northeastern, Alan Clayton Matthews. And they are predicting that New England will grow, jobs in New England will grow much slower. The country as a whole will see a 2% growth in jobs. New England will only see 1.3. Connecticut will only see 1.1. If you don't do something to change this dynamic, things will not get better in this state. Okay. Now people say to me, oh my God, why would anyone come to Connecticut given those numbers? Okay, so let's not start with people who have to get to come to Connecticut. Let's start with people who are in Connecticut. So the Boston Fed yesterday released data on college students in every state in the country, and what percentage of them are living in the state that they go to college in the year after they graduate. So how well does Connecticut hold its students who are here? So the question is not how you get them to move here. The question is how you get them to not leave. You'll be delighted to know that you rank 41st in the United States of America and are keeping less than half of your college graduates even 1 year after graduation. If Connecticut could catapult up to the level of its neighbors in New Jersey and New York, who keep about 3/4 of their college graduates at least for a year or two after graduation, you would have the workforce you need to attract the employers you need. So you don't need to get people to move into Connecticut. You need to get people to stop moving out of Connecticut. And the way that you will get people to stop moving out of Connecticut is to build the neighborhoods that they want to live in. And the neighborhoods that they want to live in are in your communities because your communities have public transportation. So, that's point one. Why you should care, even if you don't care, about TOD. TOD is not about transit. It's about economic development. Point number two, you can do it here. You can do it anywhere. Any community, the only prerequisite for transit-oriented development is transit. Okay, so myth number one, only big cities can do transit-oriented development. Not true. There's a million great resources on the Center for Transit-Oriented Development website that Suhata mentioned. I would argue for you guys, this mid-sized cities report, which specifically looks at smaller cities, what they're doing with transit and TOD, and looks at a lot with busways, is the most directly relevant. Number two, you can't do TOD with buses, only with trains. So you heard about the Health Line, everybody cites the Health Line, that's nice. That's not even close to the only place where big-time TOD is going on around buses. King County, Washington, not just the city of Seattle, the suburbs around Seattle. Eugene, Oregon, Fort Collins, Colorado. These are communities that are the same size and density as a lot of your communities, and they are building a TOD future around bus lines. And finally, TOD only works in places if there's a transit culture, and we in Connecticut don't have a transit culture because we haven't had transit. Yes, well, Salt Lake City was well known for its transit culture 10 years ago, as was Houston, Texas. It's not true. There's no transit culture where there's no transit. If you bring in transit and you do the development near the stations right, you can have a transit culture where none existed before. If we can't do better than Texas, shame on us. Okay, there is no one-size-fits-all picture of transit-oriented development. One of the reasons that I'm always loath to show pictures of transit-oriented development is people say, that will actually scare the people in my town, because my town doesn't look anything like that, and it doesn't want to look anything like that. So this is the most recent report that the Center for Transit-Oriented Development put out, and their point is that it comes in all shapes and sizes. So what they said is, the key to getting TOD right in a community is to understand the context, and there are a finite number of contexts. You can be in a big city that's business-oriented. You can be in an industrial area. You can be in a low-density residential neighborhood. So if your station is in a low-density residential neighborhood, then look at the part of the CTOD book about how to do TOD in that context. But there are lots of different contexts in which transit-oriented development works, and you just have to understand which context are you in, because you have to do different things in the different contexts, okay? So can we build TOD here, really, question? So this is the busway. This is the transit-oriented development database. It's on the CTOD website. You can click on your station area, or you can look at the corridor as a whole. They have the knowledge corridor as well. And it basically takes all kinds of data, census data, but it makes the geography be a half-mile circle around your transit station. So instead of you thinking about your community as a whole, you really can look at the part of your community that's your first station area plan. Just to give you a sense, so first of all, I want to tell you about a mature transit region. So Boston, 3.5% of the land area of metropolitan Boston is located within half a mile of an MBTA high-frequency bus, transit, or commuter rail station. 3.5%. Roughly 1/5 of the regional economy is located on that 3.5% of our land area. Whether you count that by population, households, jobs, okay? That's what transit does. Most regions are actually two places. The places near transit and the rest of the region. And even in a place like this, which hasn't had a big history of transit, if you actually look at the, in this case, busway stations, you will see that your existing population per residential acre is already twice as big in your station areas as it is in the Hartford MSA as a whole. Your block size is much smaller. Your median income is half. You have way more rental housing, twice as much rental housing. You have way less cars. So, 71% of the households that live near there already have 0 or 1 cars. So even with not a lot of transit service, the good news is, for the busway, it's actually in the right place. You have a running start on what transit-oriented development would look like. You have to build on that. So the last point, so that we can then have a good half-hour conversation before we send everybody home. So how do you put all this together, everything you've heard today and you've heard before today? Okay, so here's my take, having done this for about 10 years and been to about, 40 or 50 places. The point of building, so I don't call it transit-oriented development, by the way, it doesn't do a thing for most people. You are about to have a huge asset, and that asset is a transit-rich neighborhood. The neighborhood has transit service, and it didn't before. Transit-rich neighborhoods are not for everybody, but they don't have to be for everybody, because they're still going to only be half or 1 or 2 or 3% of the regional land base, right? When you actually look at what happens with successful transit-oriented development, it is about self-selection. It is about a group of people who want to live there, wants to be near the transit, wants to live in multifamily housing, wants to live in a walkable place. And the truth is, there are plenty of them. More than you will be able to build homes and create jobs for any time in the next decade, right? So you don't have to change your whole town. And when people in your town say, I don't want my neighborhood to look like that, the answer is, well, we won't do anything in your neighborhood, but we want to create a place so that the people who want to live in this kind of place have a place like that. Okay? And the good news is the people who want to select for those neighborhoods are people who are desirable for many communities, including your own kids, your own school teachers, your own parents, people who will be employed and pay Social Security so the rest of us can retire someday. The key to transit-oriented development, then, is to say there's a subset of people who only want to live in those places. So if we take this precious asset, which is the teeny, tiny part of our land base that is within walking distance of a transit station, and we use it for something that isn't about those people and those uses, we're wasting it. I tell people all the time, I have no ideological opposition to 4,000 square feet condominiums with 2 parking spaces. I have a huge ideological opposition to building them next to a transit station, because there is no data that people who live in housing like that will ever use the transit. So you have wasted the transit access. That same condo 2 miles away, that's what you want in your community, that's what you want for your tax base, build it. Don't put it near the transit station. So you need to reserve the land near the transit station, and you need to make sure that that land creates a combination of homes and jobs, because transit is basically a commuting mode. So you can build all the homes you want near transit, but if the job isn't in the transit-served area, they're going to get in their car every morning and drive to the job, right? Multifamily housing, including owner-occupied multifamily housing, rental housing, both market rate and affordable, are critical, because that's actually who wants to be near transit. So you need to zone, carve out, create preferences for at the state level through policy. You need to make space. It just, honest to God, does not make a lot of sense to put detached single-family homes within walking distance of transit. I can assure you, without knowing the numbers, that a lot of Connecticut is zoned for detached single-family housing. Okay? And I showed you the housing demand numbers, right? So you got a lot of land already zoned for it, don't have a ton of demand. Take the little tiny piece of Connecticut that's next to the busway stations and the knowledge corridor stations and reserve it for the kinds of places that you can only put near transit. And then the last point I want to make, and this is a place I often tell communities to start if they're having trouble having a community conversation about why they should want transit-oriented development. TOD is not just about orienting development to the transit, it's actually about orienting development to places where you have more transportation choices. And the walkability of communities is actually as important as the transit access, both to the transit use, but also to the creation of these places. So if people in your community are uncomfortable with the conversation about creating a great transit-oriented place, have a conversation about creating a great walkable place, and you'll begin to get the same thing. And finishing up with where we started today, if you're trying to create value and leverage value, this is a study that was done in the Washington, D.C. area where Chris Weinberger actually sort of came up with a definition of what a walkable place is, and then divided the region into walkable, he calls them walk-ups because it stands for, I don't remember, walkable something, 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 urban place, okay? But it's a clever acronym, so he likes it. The point is, he's a real estate finance guy, so then he looked at the last 3 real estate cycles, and by the last cycle, the current cycle, the 2009 cycle, a full half of all development in metropolitan DC, that is all office development, all rental housing development, all single-family housing development, all commercial, all hotel development, a full half is occurring in these walkable places, which constitute a few percent of the entire MSA's area. That's where developers want to be. You want developers, you want development, you want to leverage value. Developers want walkable places. Millennials want walkable places. Start by making your transit station areas walkable places with multifamily and rental housing, and you are well on the road to achieving the kind of value that transit can bring to your community in Connecticut. So I'm going to stop there so we have plenty of time for conversation. And if people have questions for prior speakers who are still around, you can also direct them to other folks.
Don't jump all at once. Calm down, please. Hi, Andy Brecker from the town of Newington. I'm going to give up some of my table mates here who were talking during lunch. And they own large houses in beautiful suburban communities. I mean, really large houses. And they have them up for sale because they want to move to places that are more walkable and closer to public transit. And they want a different lifestyle than they had out there in the suburbs with their 4 or 6, or, 20 acres. Why do you want to discriminate against them wanting to live in a 4,000 square foot condominium right close to transit? Yes, they'll still have their 2-car garage, but they actually do want to get on a train and go to New York, or hopefully in the future go to Boston, or maybe get into downtown Hartford or downtown New Britain. I hear you say we don't want them, but don't we actually want wealthy people with means, living near transit, creating an anchor for new, vibrant communities located at transit stations?
Yes, if they're willing to give up the 2 cars. It's not the income, and it's not the ownership. Just to be real clear about this, okay? There is no data that says that people that have 1 car per worker use transit to any extent. If they actually have 2 cars, they do not have a problem driving to Metro North or Amtrak to take the train to New York and Boston. So let me tell you how Boston deals with we need to reserve the place, okay? They absolutely love market rate housing, including condos, okay, near their stations. This is how it works. You get 1 parking space per unit, no matter how big or how many bedrooms it has, okay? It is priced separately from the unit, so every owner has a choice whether to just buy the unit or buy the unit and the parking space. They cannot get an on-street residential parking permit. The addresses of these condo projects are excluded from the city's residential parks, so they can't cheat by having 1 car in the garage and another one on the street. And the developers give them a free 1-year transit pass for the first year after they move in the condo, because they are trying to take advantage of self-selection and have the people who choose to live on the 2 or 3% of their land area near transit be people who will use the transit. So that, I don't have any problem with market rate. I don't have any problem with condos. I do not have any problem with rich people. I am one of all of those, and God willing, one day when I boot my 11th grader out of the house, I'm in a pretty walkable, transit-oriented community, I'll move into an even more. But I'm just telling you, we actually know a lot. I gave this talk, last time I was down here, I have the slides, but I didn't bring them. We know a lot about who uses transit, and we know a lot about who doesn't use transit. Okay? And so my argument is we have to take that body of knowledge and we need to create the places near transit for the people who will use it. And other cities, Seattle, San Francisco, have basically eliminated parking near transit and said anybody can move there, you just have to be willing to live without a car. And in an age of Zipcar, quite honestly, that's not an unreasonable request.
In our station areas in Connecticut, we have traditional towns with their smaller buildings that we don't want to get rid of, that a lot of mom and pop property owners. And, most, when I come to these things, and like yesterday when we had lunch, I brought this up as well, we have the challenge and opportunity to develop around these stations in these existing buildings, and we're not, maybe you can tell me I'm wrong, we're not going to attract big-time developers to these small units. So how do we figure out a way to get the mom and pop, 1, to want to do it, and 2, the services or technical assistance they need to do that?
because I think that's the biggest challenge we face here in Connecticut. We can't do the big assemble a bunch of land and get a big developer in.
Yeah, I mean, look, a two-family house in the right place is a transit-oriented development. So, I mean, there's a few things, right? So you definitely need technical assistance to work with the mom-and-pop developers. One mistake, actually, that I would not make, especially if it's not yet a mature transit thing, is to tell them that the first floor has to be retail, and they should put apartments upstairs. And the reason is Suhada can tell you, you just need a certain number of bodies to support retail. So if they have an unrented storefront on the first page, you're going to destroy the economics of the housing that they put upstairs. That said, you definitely care what the first floor use is, but it doesn't necessarily have to be retail is all I'm saying. I wrote some transit-oriented zoning for a place that wasn't yet very transit-oriented, and we allowed daycare centers, and we allowed artist live work studios, and we tried to be really creative, and we did form-based zoning, and we required the floor-to-ceiling height to be high enough so that when it became mature, it could be retail in the future. But we did not make them put the retail use on the first floor because we wanted them to have the maximum capacity to use the box that is their small building for whatever the high-value uses were that would make the project economical. I mean, I think one of the things that, unfortunately, most of us have had to sort of figure out to get this right is you really do have to understand the economics of projects, and small-scale projects are really hard to pencil out, so you got to work with people to give them a fair amount of flexibility. The other thing I will tell you, though, is on small lots, eliminating parking minimums, or if you have to have parking, eliminate driveways. Driveways take up too much room for small-scale projects. Let them do alley-fed parking off the back of their property, the way we actually did in the days when people had apartment buildings above retail. You would be surprised how much you can change the economics of a 3 to 10 unit project by not actually having to have conventional surface parking or driveways. It just uses up too much of the lot area. They can't produce enough value. So you can do it a couple of units at a time, but it won't look like that's in development a couple of units at a time in a different part of town.
I support expanded public transit in Connecticut. I drank the Kool-Aid a long time ago, but I have two great concerns about how we're going, where we're going. One of them is that we'll do transit light, and I define transit light as a commuter-oriented transit system, running on a commuter-oriented schedule. When, if you're really going to change people's habits, you need a continuum of service over the likely timeline of their daily lives, not going to and from work, but wherever else they want to go. The second major concern is that we will not invest enough at the destination end of the trip, wherever that may be. Much of what I've heard in the past 2 months of meetings I've attended on the subject has really focused on the source of the transit. And given that we are a squalid environment here in Connecticut, and will remain one for some considerable time, it seems to me that if we don't invest enough in that last mile, which is really the last 5 miles at the point of destination, we're not going to move enough people to transit that we need to move in order for it to be effective, have critical mass, be economical, and all of that. So I would appreciate your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I mean, and other folks who are on the other panels can chime in as well. So I agree with a lot of what you said. So, but you don't need to make transit work for all trips. You need to give people options for all trips, right? So grocery shopping by transit is just never going to be a wildly popular use. It's just, any of us who had access to a car would not choose to do their grocery shop. That said, you could have groceries delivered to you. So the point is that you need to create what I call an ecosystem that allows people to live a car-light lifestyle. And that can mean transit to work, basic goods and services within walking distance of their house, maybe some bike lanes and bike sharing, maybe weekend and evening service that's different, right? So when I was in Zurich, Switzerland, the thing that I found the most amazing is when you get their transit map, it's 2 maps on 2 different sides. And one side is the weekday transit services, and the back is the evening and weekends transit service. It's not that they don't have evening, they run them differently. They focus on getting you to the entertainment district, to the restaurant district. It's just, the trips are different, right? So it's not actually about making transit do all the work for all trips, for all people, all the time, but it is about creating a place where you can live in the place and imagine getting to many of the things you do in the course of a week without transit. But one of the keys is not necessarily moving people to their destinations on transit, it's moving the destinations to people. So if your immediate neighborhood has a couple of restaurants and a store and a gym and a daycare center, then it's not about those trips on transit, it's about walking, right? So the best studies of what happens to travel behavior in transit-oriented neighborhoods is that for every one trip made on transit, there are 5 trips made on foot. And that's actually what creates a travel pattern that lets people get to the things they need. And then again, as I said, in an age where you don't have to own a car to have access to a car, this transformed the whole idea of sustainable development. Because the question is, you can get by without a car for most of the week. You don't have to own it for the 3 trips you need to make by car. And now there's a called Vertigo, which is Hackensack, where you don't even rent a zip car by the hour. You rent a car in 15-minute increments, and they're everywhere. Literally pick up a car, drive it to the grocery store, put it in a different space, pay for the 15 minutes, shop, walk out to a different space, take a different car, drive it back to your house, unload your groceries, you've paid for 2 15 increments of a car. Okay? There were 100,000 people who belonged to car shares in this country 10 years ago. The industry, the J.P. Powers estimate is there will be 5 million by 2016. So the question is not what can transit do. The question is what can the combination of walking, biking, using transit, and car shares do? And the answer is a lot if you design the communities right.
Other questions? All right. Okay.
Hi, my name is Jim Moran. Now, I'm not actually from the area. I was born here, but I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Mm-hmm. And Ann Arbor is got 2 transit-oriented themes to it. One is that it is on the Amtrak line, but it's very underserved Amtrak line between Detroit and Chicago. And that does provide some business. But Ann Arbor has what's considered an incredible walkable community, an incredible transit-oriented development stream based totally on buses, because there's no real rapid transit there at all in terms of rail or anything else. And it's built, so I know most of the thought here is around the rail corridors and whatnot, but to not be aware of what you can do by and the buses, by the way, do the same thing. On Fridays, they bring you to transportation options on the weekends rather than just workday options during the day. But I just thought that's something that I think is overlooked by some communities. And there's, for many citizens, it's free. Like seniors, it's free. The bus is free. And it's supported by tax dollars, but what it's done is really transformed the city. And I've watched it from when there was no bus system to a full bus system. It spreads out in every direction. So.
Yeah, no, I'm a huge fan of buses. There was just a report done by a companion group, friends of ours up in Boston called Mass Inc., which focused its work. We focus a lot of our work in Boston in the inner core. They focus their work on like the older industrial cities, the Holyokes and the Brocktons and the Lawrences and the Springfields of Massachusetts, okay? And they just did a study on best practices for smaller cities that have only bus transportation. And people around the country are doing amazing things because just like the car share, a bus no longer has to be 40 feet long and full of people to work, right? Buses can be everything from little tiny shuttle vans. Buses don't have to have schedules anymore. You can have on-demand transit services. You can have different schedules, different times of the day, different times of the year. So again, it's part of this idea that we are trying to create communities in which people have a robust enough menu of transportation choices so that they can get as many of their daily, weekly, monthly needs met as possible with as little driving as possible. And no one linear busway running from point A to point B is going to meet all those needs. So the question is how you leverage. That's the spine, though. That is the spine. It's that hopefully gets you back and forth to the most important destinations you have. But from that spine, you both have to build communities and you have to build additional transportation options to get you to the other places that are on the spine but that are important.
Stephanie, I've got a question for you. To take advantage of this opportunity in front of us, we need our governments to be pretty sharp and quick. And in places that have done good TOD, what has it looked like? I imagine that state agencies integrated with each other well, and then that relationship municipalities. You might want to focus. That's the hard part, but
But yes, okay, so thematically, I would say there is better interagency communication both across the state, across municipalities, there are joint jurisdictions, and vertically between the state and municipalities. That doesn't happen overnight. Let's just be real clear about that. But it does. When it happens, it substantially accelerates the pace of making transit-oriented development happen. One of the things that one of David's slides sort of triggered for me, the one where he was showing how Connecticut currently deploys its economic development resources, is the very idea of transit-oriented development is that geography matters, location matters. All places are not created equal. Some places are more equal than others. Places with transit have different needs, right? You cannot create location-specific development if you have location-neutral state policies. In other words, this is, as far as the state is concerned, every place is the same. You will get to transit-oriented development or smart growth or compact development or whatever you want to call it because they're equally likely to invest resources or place programs anywhere, and that doesn't make sense. So I would say one of the attributes of places that do TOD is, in fact, they acknowledge the importance of geography and they target lots of things to geography, whether those are economic development incentives, low-income housing tax credits, infrastructure money. So Massachusetts has a program called NassWorks, and it didn't involve any new money. It involved taking a whole bunch of tiny little programs, you know, that repair sidewalks or put up gas lights in downtowns or do small pocket parts. They put them all in one big pot, right? And then they basically said, we have a point scale for good places, and the places that have the most points get priority access to infrastructure money. And it's not that we're saying that other places, you know, we hate you, but what we are saying is a very limited amount of state money to invest. As a matter of state policy, we want more population, jobs, growth in some places and not others. We have to change our programs. You do have to be geographically targeted if you want certain geographies to grow. And then another thing that I think Sakata mentioned that I think is really important is partnerships. I think EDS, NEDS, and large employers, there was actually a study that just came out in the last couple of weeks by a New York-based organization called Good Jobs First, and it's called Bus for Buses. And it is case studies of large employers playing a critical role in increasing the range of transportation options in communities across the United States. They want to get work, you know, in their, in some cases, improving the bus. So, different actors, pieces to come together to create transit-rich neighborhoods. Any sense of partnership, put people in the same room and around the same table are going to help move that process along.
any other questions?
You mentioned a report, best practices for buses in smaller cities in Massachusetts, and I wanted to get down where we can get that.
It's on the website of a group called Mass Inc. I'm just blanking on the name of it right now. It came out in, I would say, March. It was definitely this year. So they have something called the Gateway Cities Innovation Institute, because that's in Massachusetts, that's what we call sort of Springfield and places like that are gateway cities. So it's on their website. But I mean, there's, you know, King County, Seattle, exceptional job. Broward County, Florida, incredible job of using us. And Broward County is a place that doesn't have big, like, single employment. Job of understanding that and sort of moving their transit system around. I have to say that transit operators working closely with communities is really important. Bob Cervera, who's one of the sort of granddaddies of thinking about TOD, always transit-oriented development requires transit operators to realize that their job is not to run the buses and trains. It's to fill the buses and trains. It is a fundamental difference in mind shift because you can't fill buses and trains without understanding Land use. We just did focus groups in Worcester and Lynn and Springfield and other cities talking to low-income Latino families about how we could make the bus system better. The Dukakis Center, it's being released in a couple weeks. But one of the very basic things was that one of the biggest destinations was the community college, and the bus schedule was not aligned with the start and end of class periods. So you couldn't get there for the beginning of class period 1. You could get there an hour before the beginning of class period 1, and you could get there 15 minutes after the beginning of class period 1, but you couldn't get there at. They're not aligned with shift changes at hospitals, right? So most hospitals do this big shift change at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They go 8 to 3, 3 to 11, 11 to 8 in the morning, right? 3 is not when most transit operators think, oh, that's peak hour, I need to have a lot of capacity. But if the line serves a hospital, turns out that both getting people there at 3 and getting people out at 3 is really important. So working with the transit operators, not just on the busway, but again, for all the other services that are going to kind of operate off that spine becomes really important, because then you have more places that people can get to on transit than just the trips that are made in the linear alignment.
Thank you, Stephanie. Well done. And thanks to all of you for spending a few hours with us. This has been fabulous. All the presentations that you saw and materials that we've given you will be on our website soon. We'll email you to let you know those are available. Also, we're going to be doing another event like this, partnering with CROG and the Knowledge Corridor in September, and we'll let you know about that as well. Are there any other announcements you have? I think we're good to go. Thank you so much.